He left after one night, now he's back. And she's raising his son alone, asterisk. The morning sun cast golden ribbons across the pristine sands of Moonhaven, picturesque coastal town where time seemed to move at the gentle pace of rolling waves. Celeste Rivera adjusted the colorful array of handmade jewelry on her weathered wooden table, each piece catching the early light like captured ocean dreams. Her fingers, stained with silver polish and calloused from countless hours of crafting, arranged the delicate shell necklaces and turquoise bracelets with practiced care at 23. Celeste had inherited her grandmother's gift for transforming simple beach treasures into stunning works of art. Her small shop had been in the family for generations. Nestled between a vintage bookstore and a cafe that served the best fish tacos in 3 counties, the salty breeze carried the mingled scents of jasmine and seaweed through her dark hair as she prepared for another day of sharing her creations with tourists and locals alike. The morning crowd was typically light, consisting mostly of joggers and dog walkers who paused to admire her work before continuing their routines. Celeste didn't mind the quiet moments. They gave her time to sketch new designs in her worn leather journal. Inspired by the ever-changing moods of the sea, she was lost in drawing a particularly intricate wave pattern when a shadow fell across her table. Looking up, she found herself gazing into the most striking pair of green eyes she had ever seen. The man standing before her was tall and lean, with sun-kissed brown hair that suggested he spent time outdoors despite his expensive-looking clothes. His white linen shirt was perfectly pressed, but there was something in his posture that seemed weighed down by invisible burdens. "These are beautiful," Marcus said, his voice carrying a slight rasp that suggested too many late nights and too much stress. He picked up one of her signature pieces, a bracelet woven with tiny shells and silver wire that seemed to capture the essence of moonlight on water. "Did you make all of these yourself?" Celeste nodded, suddenly aware of how simple her sundress must look compared to his polished appearance. "Every piece. I collect the shells during my morning walks and work on them in my studio upstairs." She gestured toward the small apartment above her shop, where she had lived alone since her grandmother's passing 2 years ago. Marcus turned the bracelet over in his hands, studying the intricate craftsmanship. As the CEO of Thompson Industries, a multinational corporation his father had built from the ground up, he was accustomed to luxury and perfection. But there was something different about this piece, something that spoke to a part of him that had been buried under years of boardroom meetings and calculated decisions. "This one calls to me," he said, meeting her eyes again. There was a vulnerability in his gaze that made Celeste's breath catch. "How much?" $40, she replied, then immediately worried she had priced it too high. Most of her customers were tourists looking for inexpensive souvenirs. Without hesitation, Marcus pulled out his wallet and handed her the crisp 20s. As their fingers brushed during the exchange, Celeste felt an electric current run up her arm. The sensation was so unexpected that she nearly dropped the money. "I'm Marcus," he said, not moving away from her table, despite having completed his purchase. "Celeste," she replied, her voice softer than usual. Something about this stranger made her feel both nervous and oddly safe at the same time. "Do you have lunch planned, Celeste?" The question surprised them both. Marcus hadn't intended to ask, but something about her genuine smile and the way she looked at her art with such love made him want to extend their conversation. She glanced at her watch, realizing she had been so absorbed in their interaction that she had forgotten about everything else. "I usually close up around noon on weekdays. There's not much foot traffic after the morning rush." "Perfect. I know a place." Marcus found himself smiling for the first time in weeks, the tight knot of stress in his chest beginning to loosen as Celeste began packing up her jewelry. She couldn't help but wonder what she was getting herself into. She had always been cautious with strangers, especially ones who clearly came from a different world than hers. But there was something magnetic about Marcus, something that made her want to discover what stories lay behind those troubled green eyes. The afternoon that followed would prove to be the beginning of something neither of them had been looking for, but both desperately needed. The small seaside restaurant Marcus had chosen was tucked away from the main tourist strip, a hidden gem where locals gathered to share stories over fresh seafood and homemade wine. Wooden tables overlooked the harbor. The gentle sound of water lapping against fishing boats created a natural soundtrack. For their conversation, Celeste found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't in months. Marcus listened with genuine interest. As she shared stories about her grandmother's legacy, the challenges of running a small business, and her dreams of expanding her jewelry line. In return, he opened up about the suffocating expectations of corporate life, the loneliness of success, and his growing desire to find meaning beyond profit margins. "I came here to think," Marcus admitted, as they shared a plate of garlic shrimp. "My father wants me to merge with a company in New York. It would double our revenue, but it would also mean giving up any hope of the life I actually want to live." "What kind of life is that?" Celeste asked, genuinely curious about this man, who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Watching a seagull dive for fish in the distance? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure anymore. I used to love photography, traveling to places where no one knew my last name. I wanted to document real stories, real people." He looked at her with a self-deprecating smile. "Sounds naive, doesn't it? It sounds like you know exactly what you want," Celeste replied. "You're just scared to reach for it." Her words hung in the salty air between them, carrying a truth that Marcus had been avoiding for years. Here was this remarkable woman who had built something beautiful with her own hands, who woke up every day excited about her work, while he felt trapped in golden handcuffs. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of coral and lavender, Marcus found himself reluctant for the day to end. "Would you like to take a walk on the beach?" he asked. "I promise I'm not usually this forward with people I just met." Les's laugh was like music, light and genuine. "I'd love to. But I should warn you, I'm not usually this trusting either." They slipped off their shoes and walked barefoot along the water's edge, the warm sand cushioning their steps. The beach was nearly empty except for a few couples in the distance and an elderly man walking his dog. The setting felt intimate and private, as if the ocean had created a special sanctuary just for them. "Tell me about your grandmother," Marcus said as they found a smooth piece of driftwood to sit on. The moon was beginning to rise, casting a silver path across the water. Celeste's eyes lit up with love and memories. "She was everything to me. My parents died when I was 15, and she took me in without hesitation. She taught me that beautiful things come from patience and care, whether it's jewelry or relationships." Her voice grew softer. "She always said that the right person would appreciate not just what I create, but why I create it." Marcus reached over and took her hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in his. "She sounds like she was an incredible woman. I think she would have liked knowing that her granddaughter is carrying on that wisdom." The simple touch sent warmth spreading through Celeste's entire body. She had dated before, but never felt this kind of instant connection, this sense that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. When Marcus leaned closer, she didn't pull away. Their first kiss was gentle and tentative, a question asked and answered without words. The second kiss was deeper, filled with the promise of possibilities neither had dared to imagine that morning. Time seemed to stop as they held each other on that moonlit beach, two souls recognizing something familiar and precious in one another. "I should probably get you home," Marcus whispered against her hair, though every fiber of his being wanted to stay in this perfect moment forever. Celeste looked up at him, her heart racing with a boldness she had never felt before. "What if? I don't want to go home alone tonight." Vulnerability in her voice nearly undid him. Marcus cupped her face in his hands, searching her eyes to make sure she was certain. What he saw there was trust, desire, and something that looked remarkably like the beginning of love. "Are you sure?" he asked, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. Instead of answering with words, Celeste rose to her feet and extended her hand to him. Together, they walked back to Wardtown, toward her small apartment above the jewelry shop, toward a night that would change everything. Celeste woke to the sound of rain pattering against her bedroom window and the warmth of Marcus's arms around her waist. The previous night had been a revelation of tenderness and passion, a perfect fusion of souls that had left her feeling more complete than she had ever imagined possible. She turned in his embrace, studying his peaceful face in the gray morning light. Memorizing every detail, Marcus stirred at her movement, his green eyes opening slowly before focusing on her with a smile that made her heart flutter. "Good morning. Beautiful," he murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Good morning," she whispered back, suddenly shy, despite their intimacy. "I was thinking I could make us breakfast. There's a little cafe downstairs that makes amazing coffee, and I have fresh fruit upstairs." Before Marcus could respond, his phone began buzzing insistently on the nightstand. He frowned, glancing at the screen, and Celeste saw his expression change instantly. The peaceful contentment disappeared, replaced by tension and what looked like dread. "I'm sorry, I have to take this," he said, already reaching for the device. "It's my father." Celeste nodded and slipped out of bed, giving him privacy while she gathered her scattered clothes from the night before. Through the thin walls, she could hear the conversation growing heated, though she couldn't make out specific words. Marcus's voice became increasingly strained, punctuated by long silences that suggested he was being lectured or commanded. When he finally emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, he was already dressed and looked like a completely different person from the man who had held her so tenderly just hours before. His face was pale, his jaw set in grim determination. "I have to go," he said without meeting her eyes. "There's been a crisis with one of our major clients. My father needs me back in Chicago immediately." Celeste felt her stomach drop, but she forced herself to smile. "Of course, I understand. Business comes first." She had learned that lesson from watching her grandmother navigate the seasonal nature of tourism. Marcus finally looked at her. She saw genuine anguish in his expression. "Celeste, last night was... He struggled for words. "It was perfect. You're perfect. But my life is complicated right now, and I don't know when I'll be able to get away again." "It's okay," she said quietly, though her heart was beginning to crack. We both knew this was just one night. But even as she spoke the words, she didn't believe them. What they had shared felt like the beginning of something profound, not a casual encounter to be forgotten. Still, she had her pride, and she wouldn't beg him to stay. Marcus stepped toward her, his hands reaching for her face, but his phone buzzed again with what sounded like an urgent message. He glanced at it and cursed under his breath. "I have to catch the first flight out," he said, his voice thick with regret. "My driver is already on his way." He kissed her then, desperately and thoroughly, as if trying to memorize the taste of her lips. When he pulled away, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'll call you," he promised, though they both heard the uncertainty in his voice.
"I'll
"Be here," Celeste replied, meaning it completely. After he left, the apartment felt hollow and too quiet. Celeste made herself coffee and sat by the window, watching the rain create patterns on the glass. She told herself that she had known this. What happened that men like Marcus didn't stay with women like her? Their worlds were too different, their circumstances too complicated. But as days turned into weeks with no word from him, the silence began to feel less like a delay and more like an ending. Celeste threw herself into her work, creating new designs. With a fierce intensity that helped distract her from the growing ache in her chest, it was 6 weeks later. During a routine doctor's appointment for what she thought was a persistent stomach bug, Celeste's world shifted completely. The blood test results were clear and undeniable. She was pregnant, sitting in the sterile examination room. Staring at the positive test in her hands, Celeste felt a mixture of terror and wonder wash over her. She thought of Marcus's gentle hands, his whispered promises, the way he had looked at her as if she was something precious and rare. She also thought about the fact that she didn't even have his last name, let alone his phone number. In their whirlwind romance, they had been so focused on the present moment that practical details like contact information had seemed irrelevant. That night, Celeste sat on her bed with her laptop searching for any information about Marcus from Chicago who might work in his father's company. But without a surname or company name, her efforts were futile. There were hundreds of Marcuses in Chicago, no way to narrow down which one had held her heart for one perfect night. As she placed her hand on her still flat stomach, Celeste made a quiet vow she would raise this child with all the love and strength her grandmother had shown her. She would build a life filled with beauty and meaning, just as she had always planned. But late at night, when the ocean whispered secrets to the shore, she still found herself hoping that someday, somehow, Marcus would find his way back to her. 5 years had transformed Celeste in ways she could never have imagined. The frightened young woman who had discovered her pregnancy alone had evolved into a confident mother and successful businesswoman. Her jewelry shop had expanded into 3 locations along the coast. Her pieces were now sold in boutiques as far away as San Francisco. But the most significant change in her life was the energetic, 4-year-old boy who currently sat at the kitchen table, carefully stringing colorful beads onto a piece of string with the focused concentration that reminded her so much of his father. "Mama, look." Noah held up his creation with pride. Celeste's heart melted, as it did every time she looked at her son. Noah had inherited Marcus's striking green eyes and strong jawline, but his gentle nature and artistic temperament were purely his own. He was curious about everything, kind to everyone, and possessed an innate understanding of beauty that amazed her daily. "It's absolutely perfect, sweetheart," she said, kneeling down to let him fasten the bracelet around her wrist. "I'll treasure it always." Noah beamed and returned to his beading project. Celeste watched him work, marveling at how naturally he had taken to creating things with his hands. At 4, he was already showing signs of the artistic gift that ran in their family, and she had begun teaching him simple jewelry-making techniques. Life as a single mother had been challenging in ways she hadn't anticipated, but it had also brought her joy beyond measure. Her small community had rallied around her during the pregnancy, offering support without judgment. Mrs. Chen, who owned the bookstore next door, had become a surrogate grandmother to Noah, watching him during Celeste's busiest work hours. Financial struggles of early motherhood had motivated Celeste to push her business to new heights. She had learned to design websites, manage social media marketing, and negotiate with suppliers. Her grandmother's small shop had evolved into Coastal Treasures, a brand that represented sustainable, handcrafted jewelry with a story. "Mama, why don't I have a daddy like Tommy?" Noah asked one evening as she tucked him into bed. It was a question he had started asking more frequently as he began school and noticed that his family structure was different from most of his classmates. Celeste sat on the edge of his bed, choosing her words carefully. She had always planned to be honest with Noah about his father, but in age-appropriate ways. "You do have a daddy, sweetheart," she said gently. "He just lives far away and he doesn't know about you yet." Noah's green eyes, so much like Marcus's, studied her with an intelligence that sometimes startled her. "Will he come see me someday? I don't know, baby. But what I do know is that you are loved more than all the stars in the sky, and that will never change." Noah seemed satisfied with this answer and drifted off to sleep, clutching his favorite stuffed whale. But Celeste lay awake that night, as she often did, wondering about Marcus. She had stopped actively searching for him after the first year, but she still found herself scanning crowds at art fairs and beach festivals, hoping to catch a glimpse of familiar green eyes. Sometimes she wondered if she should have tried harder to find him, if Noah had a right to know his father. But the practical reality was that Marcus had made his choice when he left without looking back. She couldn't force a relationship that he clearly didn't want. Instead, she focused on creating the best possible life for her son. Noah thrived in their small coastal town, making friends easily and showing kindness to everyone he met. He loved the ocean as much as she did, spending hours collecting shells and sea glass that he would incorporate into his own artistic creations. The jewelry business provided them with a comfortable living, and Celeste had even managed to save money for Noah's future education. She had built a life of independence and purpose, proving to herself that she could provide everything her son needed. But there were quiet moments. Usually when she was working late in her studio, when she would find herself thinking about that perfect night 5 years ago. She wondered if Marcus ever thought about her, if he remembered the connection they had shared, if he had any idea that their brief encounter had created the most precious thing in her world. Those moments of longing were always followed by determination. She had Noah, she had her work, and she had built a community that supported them both. Whatever happened in the future, she knew they would face it together. As Noah grew older and more curious about his origins, Celeste promised herself that she would tell him more about his father. But for now, it was enough that they had each other and the life they had built by the sea, surrounded by the beauty and love that had always sustained her family. The question of Marcus Thompson remained an unfinished chapter in their story, but Celeste had learned to find peace in the pages. They were writing together, one day at a time. The morning started like any other, with Noah helping Celeste arrange the jewelry display in their main shop while chattering about his upcoming kindergarten graduation. At 5, he had developed his father's intensity of focus, working with serious concentration to place each piece exactly where he thought it would look best. "This one needs more light, Mama," he said, moving a turquoise pendant to catch the morning sun streaming through the window. "Pretty things should sparkle." Celeste smiled at his innocent wisdom, marveling once again at the thoughtful nature that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his DNA. She was about to respond when the shop bell chimed, announcing their first customer of the day. She looked up with her practiced welcoming smile, but the words of greeting died on her lips. Standing in the doorway, looking older and somehow more substantial than she remembered, was Marcus Thompson. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they simply stared at each other. Marcus appeared stunned, his green eyes taking in every detail of her face as if confirming that she was real. He was still handsome, though there were lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. His expensive suit looked out of place in her bohemian shop, but his expression was vulnerable in a way that transported her instantly back to their night on the beach. "Celeste," he said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Marcus," she managed to reply, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was Noah who broke the spell. Looking up from his arrangement with curious eyes that were an exact mirror of the stranger's. "Hello," Noah said politely, displaying the good manners Celeste had taught him. "Are you looking for something special?" Marcus's gaze shifted to the child, and Celeste watched as recognition dawned across his features. The similarities were undeniable: the same green eyes, the same strong jawline, even the same way of tilting his head when curious about something. "Noah," Marcus whispered, the name coming from some place of instinctive knowing. The little boy looked pleased that the stranger knew his name, unaware of the emotional earthquake happening between the two adults. "Mama, how does he know my name?" Noah asked, turning to Celeste with innocent curiosity. Celeste found herself frozen, unprepared for this moment, despite having imagined it countless times over the past 5 years. Her carefully planned explanations dissolved under the weight of reality. Marcus took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Noah's face. "You're 5 years old, aren't you?" he asked gently. Noah nodded proudly. "My birthday was last month. Had a whale cake because whales are my favorite." "Mine too," Marcus said softly. And Celeste remembered him mentioning his childhood fascination with marine life during their long conversations 5 years ago. The shop felt too small suddenly, the air thick with unspoken truths and 5 years of separation. Celeste found her voice, though it came out shakier than she would have liked. "Oh, sweetheart, why don't you go next door and visit Mrs. Chen? I think she has some new books you might like." Noah looked between them with the perceptive intelligence that sometimes made him seem older than his years. But he obediently gathered his small backpack and headed for the door, pausing only to give Marcus a friendly wave. "It was nice to meet you, mister," he said, with the sweetness that never failed to melt hearts. "It was nice to meet you too, Noah," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. After Noah left, the silence stretched between them. Filled with years of questions and explanations, neither knew how to begin. "He's mine," Marcus said finally. It wasn't a question. Celeste nodded, wrapping her arms around herself protectively. "I tried to find you. Didn't even know your last name, and you never called like you promised." Marcus closed his eyes, pain etching deep lines across his face. "I wanted to. God, Celeste. I wanted to call you every single day. But my father." He stopped, shaking his head. "That's not an excuse. I should have fought harder to get back to you." "What are you doing here now?" The question came out sharper than she intended. But 5 years of wondering and hoping and finally accepting had built walls around her heart. The merger fell through last month, I finally stood up to my father and walked away from the company. Marcus moved closer, his eyes searching her face. I've thought about you every day since I left. That night we shared, it was the most real thing that had ever happened to me. I came back to find you to see if maybe... He gestured helplessly. And now I discover I have a son. The word son hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and possibility. His name is Noah Marcus Rivera, Celeste said quietly. I gave him your first name because it was all I had of you. Marcus's composure finally cracked, and tears spilled down his cheeks. I've missed 5 years of his life. 5 years of being his father. He left, Celeste reminded him, though her anger was beginning to soften in the face of his obvious pain. You made a choice. I made the wrong choice, Marcus said fiercely. I was a coward who let my father's expectations matter. More than the woman I? He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. The woman you what? Celeste prompted, her heart racing. Marcus stepped forward until he was close enough to touch her, though he kept his hands at his sides. The woman I fell in love with in the space of one perfect day. The woman I've been trying to forget for 5 years and never could. Outside, they could hear Noah's laughter mixing with Mrs. Chen's gentle voice, a reminder of the innocent life that had been shaped by their choices. I don't know how to do this, Celeste admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I built a life without you. Noah has a life without you. We're not the same people we were 5 years ago. No, Marcus said gently. But I'm here now, and I want to try. I want to know my son. If you'll let me, I want to know the woman you've become too. Celeste looked out the window at Noah, who was showing Mrs. Chen one of his bead creations with animated gestures. He was happy, secure, loved, but she also saw the curiosity in his eyes whenever other children talked about their fathers, the questions that were becoming more frequent as he grew older. This can't be about guilt or obligation, she said firmly. If you want to be part of Noah's life, it has to be because you genuinely want to be his father, not because you feel you should. I want to be his father more than I've ever wanted anything, Marcus said without hesitation. And I want to be worthy of you both. Celeste studied his face, looking for the truth behind his words. What she saw there was love, regret, determination, and a maturity that hadn't been there 5 years ago. The boy who had run from responsibility had become a man willing to fight for what mattered. It won't be easy, she warned. Noah is going to have questions. He's going to need time to understand who you are. And I... She paused, vulnerability creeping into her voice. I'm going to need time to trust you again. I have all the time. In the world, Marcus said simply, I'm not going anywhere ever again. As if sensing the importance of the moment, Noah chose that instant to burst back through the shop door, his arms full of new books and his face bright with excitement. Mama, Mrs. Chen gave me 3 new books about ocean animals. Stopped. Short, when he saw that Marcus was still there, and his expression grew thoughtful. Are you staying for lunch, mister? Mama makes really good sandwiches, and I can show you my shell collection. Celeste and Marcus looked at each other over Noah's head, both understanding that this moment was the real beginning of whatever came next. I'd love to see your shell collection, Marcus said, kneeling down to Noah's level. Maybe you could tell me about whales. I used to love whales when I was your age. Noah's face lit up with pure joy at finding a kindred spirit, and he launched into an enthusiastic explanation of the differences between humpback and blue whales. As Celeste watched her son and his father discover each other, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Hope for a future that included all the pieces of her heart in one place. The road ahead would be complicated, requiring patience, forgiveness, and the courage to rebuild trust. But as she watched Marcus listen to Noah with complete attention and genuine fascination, Celeste began to believe that some love stories were worth the wait. No matter how long and painful the separation had been, their once perfect night had become something even more precious, the beginning of a family finding its way back to wholeness.